Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of May the 10th and the 11th, 2025. So at the moment, the big news is the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Now, at the time I'm recording this video, there is no birth time for him, at least no birth time I have found. I've looked at astro.com, Astro Theme, there's nothing that I can find. So we have to just take a noon chart for September the 14th, 1955, which is his date of birth. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at Leo XIV's horoscope and also considering the moment he was elected Pope. There's also the moment he was announced Pope, but I somehow think that the moment of election is more important. But before I look at Leo XIV, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for this weekend, which is the weekend of May the 10th and the 11th, 2025. As usual, if you do like this video, feel free to indicate this, that you do indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would, of course, be happy to have you as a subscriber. So here is the chart for the weekend. And so this chart is for midnight on Sunday the 11th, right in the middle of the weekend. And you can see that at midnight the moon is 3 degrees Scorpio. So on Saturday, moon moves out of Libra into Scorpio. That takes place at 20:58 London time, just around 9 o'clock in the evening. So in the Americas, over the course of Saturday afternoon, the moon will move out of Libra into Scorpio. If you are in Australia or New Zealand, that will of course happen on Sunday. So the weekend does see a changeover in terms of the sign of the moon. Additionally, we have Mercury moving into Taurus. So Mercury moves into Taurus at 1:15 in the afternoon on Saturday London time, which is fairly early in the morning in the Americas. So Saturday sees two sign changes: moon going to Scorpio, moon and Mercury going into Taurus. So there's an opposition between the moon and Mercury over the course of the weekend. But while the moon is moving through Libra, at the beginning of the weekend, the moon is making a trine to Jupiter. So that's a good place for the weekend to start. Moon in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini. That's a very fortunate aspect. It may feel that the weekend gets off to a good start, but after the moon moves into Scorpio, things may become a little more complicated, and there may be sort of less flow. I mean, Scorpio, it's a water sign, but it's not exactly a flowing water sign. And when the moon moves into Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Mercury, and then it makes a square to Pluto, and the final aspect of the main aspect of the weekend is moon square Mars. So don't make assumptions about the weekend in terms of how it starts, because I do think that it could become sort of more problematic, and there may be sort of less action and perhaps a little more fear and reserve as Saturday changes to Sunday. But it depends who you are. It depends on what your sign is. So that's the main geocentric picture. That's the main headline events over the course of the weekend. Probably the most important thing you could say is Mercury moving into Taurus. I mean, that's is an important sign change. We've had Mercury in Aries for quite a long time. Now that it's in Taurus, things do change. Mercury is about the mind. It's a way we speak. Mercury in Aries is very very definite. It likes to say what's on its mind. It can be verbally impulsive, but then Mercury moving into Taurus, it just slows things down. People don't have quite so much to say. So that might be how Mercury in Taurus does work. So that's a picture for New York. If I set the chart for Sydney, Australia, so at midnight on Sunday, the moon is at 27 Libra. So that reminds you that all day in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is moving through Libra, and that moon trine Jupiter that I talked about, it's a great aspect, and I think that moon trine Jupiter is quite possibly going to be a major influence over Saturday. So in Australia or New Zealand, it's not even that Saturday is a split day. I think that Saturday is quite possibly dominated by the moon trine Jupiter. But then, like everyone else, as Sunday gets underway, the moon changes sign, and things maybe become a little more complicated, and there isn't quite so much action. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And so here's a chart. Mercury heliocentrically is just moving into Pisces. And in fact, Mercury is, if you can actually see this, Mercury is on the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. And so with Mercury on a Neptune-Pluto midpoint, then you may feel, if you're sensitive in particular, or should I say intuitive, I'm not quite sure which one it is, but you may be aware of higher level forces represented by Neptune and Pluto, those two outer planets. Things are changing in the collective. Well, they're always changing, but with Mercury conjunct the Neptune-Pluto midpoint, people might be confused because they know things are changing, that things aren't going to stay the same, and it is something that not everyone is going to pick up, but if we're just aware of these collective forces, then we may be influenced by it, and we may just feel that things are going on behind the scenes. And all the while Jupiter is moving through a late Gemini heliocentrically, moving towards that square to Neptune. And you could say that Jupiter square Neptune is saying something similar to the Mercury on a Neptune-Pluto midpoint. Jupiter square Neptune, there is optimism, there is a belief that things maybe are getting better, that however difficult things are, there could be a way through. Is it false optimism? I mean, it might be, but there's no point in being negative just for the sake of it. And so those are a few points about the heliocentric view. I don't think there's a lot happening. Venus is making a square to Saturn. So by the end of the weekend into next week, Venus square Saturn, and it's going to perhaps slow things down emotionally. We already got Moon in Scorpio over the weekend. So Moon in Scorpio, it's a very emotional placement, but there is a certain amount of reserve and caution there. And Venus square Saturn, that might emphasize the point that certain relationships with Venus square Saturn may be a little bit strained, and we could start to become aware of the differences between ourselves and others. And you might even go so far as to see a T-square. So Mars is slowly moving towards a heliocentric opposition with Saturn. We've got Venus on the T, so heliocentrically, Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it just might be a time where we look at relationships and see the problems with relationships. And additionally, certain relationships might become a little bit transactional. We ask ourselves, what is this relationship about? How is it benefiting us? Is it benefiting us? Is it doing us any good? And that might be an issue with Venus on the Mars Saturn midpoint. But it's a heliocentric T-square that just may remind us through the way we relate to other people of what the world is really like, and what certain people are really like, and there may be a tendency to focus on the negative. So now let me look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of May the 10th and the 11th, 2025. Aries, you start the weekend thinking that things are relatively straightforward. The moon is moving through Libra, and you may be able to enjoy other people's company, and the moon is making a trine to Jupiter, and the words will be flowing, and you've got quite a lot to say for yourself. And it's a time when there really isn't much of a problem expressing the key ideas, really the way you think about things, and it almost comes naturally. But then moon moving into Scorpio, you start to realize that things are becoming a little more complicated. And when the moon moves into Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Mercury. So moon and Mercury are the two communication planets, and when they come into an opposition, you have lots of things you want to say, but the question is, how do you say it, and can you say it? And your mind might be moving quickly, but the actual events around you are slowing down, and so you try to say something, but the words might not quite come out. So don't feel you have to say everything. And also with this weekend, try to do as much as possible as early as possible. If you leave it too late, then it just might become increasingly difficult to get anything done. And additionally, you have to be aware of how other people are behaving and other people are responding. When we looked at the heliocentric chart, we noticed that Venus was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It was actually making a T-square. So Venus is a planet in the Aries chart that has a lot to do with relationships, and so Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, Venus making the T on that T-square. It just could be that some people are feeling quite sorry for themselves, and they might take the view that nothing is easy, that everything has to be struggled for, and you might not be quite sure how to respond. Your first impulse might be, get yourself together, be happy, think positively, stop analyzing the situation endlessly. But that's not going to do any good. You can't just make things better by saying bold and brave words. You're actually going to have to address the issue. And so if you want to make progress from a communication view, this weekend you may find that it actually takes a lot of work, and you're going to have to spend time not just listening to the words that people say, but also being aware of what they're giving out, and what the vibes are. And you shouldn't underestimate how complicated some people can be. They can be very complicated, and if you can be aware of those complications, well, so much the better. And that in that way, you may be able to make make slow progress. And yeah, it's all about seeing that on the surface you can't tell much. It doesn't give you much information, but it's only when you get really deep down that you can start to understand what is happening. Taurus. Mercury is moving into your sign. In fact, there's now quite a lot of activity in Taurus. You've already got the Sun in Taurus, you've already got Uranus in Taurus, and so with Mercury moving into Taurus as well, that is that indicates that you can be yourself, and you've got something to offer. You've got something you want to say, and there'll be no doubts about who you are, what you're presenting, and if you've been meaning to say something, then now might be your chance. Not everyone is going to find that this weekend is going to be good for talking, good for communicating. It kind of depends on your sign, but I think that if you're a Taurus, really, enjoy Mercury moving through Taurus. But we also have the moon moving into Scorpio. So it depends on your time zone, but certainly in the UK, Europe, Saturday evening, we see moon moving into Scorpio. That happens in the afternoon if you're in the Americas. So moon moving into Scorpio does say something about other people, and this moon in Scorpio is starting to make an opposition to the sun. So we have a full moon coming up, and this full moon, I think, is on Monday, so it's not happening over the weekend, but you're starting to feel it. And so with a full moon across the main axis of your chart coming up, I mean, again, it's not exact this weekend, but it's getting very close. You're maybe starting to see the truth of something, or the truth of somebody. Before you hadn't really thought about it, but now you're looking at it again, and you're starting to make connections, and things are becoming increasingly clear. And it's important that you accept the truth. Sometimes you don't want to see the truth because you're just happy where you are. You're comfortable. Why would you want to disturb the peace? But you need to sort of open your eyes and look at what people are presenting. Look at how people are behaving. So that may be the way the full moon is working. And I will be looking in greater detail at this full moon when I look at your horoscope for Monday, but it's kind of starting, and so really look at how other people are behaving and what they're doing, and you might come to the conclusion that some people are not what they seem, and that works both ways. You may have underestimated someone, or you may have trusted someone or believed that someone could be an important part of your life, but with this full moon, you're starting to see the limits of another person's use. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but it is important to know what people can do for you, because everything, to an extent, has a transactional element to it. And if we look at things from a heliocentric view, Venus, which is your ruler, is square Mars, square Saturn, and Venus is kind of on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so, the question is, how do you deal with that? Now, that T-square could represent an awareness of many of the things that are holding you back. And in the first instance, it could be about frustration, that you just can't move in the way you would like. But then Venus on a Mars-Saturn midpoint may represent the key, how you solve a particular problem. And so Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint may indicate that if you're prepared to just be yourself, absolutely be yourself, and to hold firm to what you believe in, then you can get through the greatest of obstacles. And perhaps you'll realize that essentially you were right all along. You know, you had your doubts in the recent past, but now it's becoming clear. Yeah, you can see where the problems are, where they lie. And some of these problems may be hard to handle, but you have awareness. And of course, awareness is also connected with the full moon. And so don't shy away from knowledge, and indeed don't shy away from people who are honest. Honesty may actually be very important over the weekend, and indeed as you move into next week. Gemini. So Gemini, Mercury is your ruler, and it is changing sign. It's moving out of Aries and it's moving into Taurus. So this sign change is important, and it may actually have the effect of slowing you down. Things might not happen at such high speed, and Geminis can have a lightning fast mind. I don't think my mind is particularly lightning fast, but they can. And with Mercury moving through Aries, your mind was going in different places, going from this place, going to this place, to that place, moving to and fro, and you perhaps had a lot you wanted to say, and sometimes you said things without really thinking them through. That could have been embarrassing, or maybe it was upsetting. Not upsetting for you, but perhaps for the people who are listening to you. But now Mercury is moving into Taurus. Yeah, it does slow things down, and it allows you to give yourself the time to work out what is happening. It's like if you've got a film of a fast event which you don't fully understand, but if you can slow that film down, go into slow motion, you can see the movement, and you can even anticipate the movement. So that may be about what Mercury in Taurus is about. Giving yourself the time and the space to really work out what is happening and to develop the right response. And you don't have to do things at lightning speed. The slower the better. And maybe you should be thinking about the time between now and when Mercury moves into Gemini. So Mercury will move into Gemini fairly soon, on 26th of May. So in 26th of May, and so around 2 weeks, Mercury will move into Gemini. So at the end of May, then you're going to find that you're really on track, and that your mind starts to move into top gear. And of course, when Mercury moves into Gemini, it starts to make a conjunction to Jupiter. That conjunction, sure, it does happen, but I'm looking ahead here, but Mercury does actually make a conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini at 29 degrees Gemini. It makes that conjunction around the 8th of June, and that might be something to look forward to. But for the moment, Mercury is in Taurus, and just it could be, but between now and late May, you need to think things through. You need to slow down, and you mustn't be looking for immediate results. And additionally, looking at the specifics of the weekend, then the weekend, it starts off with the moon in Libra, maybe starts off with moon trine Jupiter. So as you start the weekend, you might be feeling pretty good. You might feel that things are happening. But then there's a change. Moon moving into Scorpio, and that does slow the weekend down. So when the moon moves into Scorpio. That kind of depends where you are. It could be Saturday afternoon in the Americas, could be Saturday evening in Europe, it could be Sunday morning if you're in Australasia. But when the moon moves into Scorpio, that means that you have to be calmer and more considered, and there may be things you have to do which annoy you, because moon in Scorpio, in early Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Mercury. We've got this aspect, moon opposition Mercury, and Geminis might find that annoying. It may feel like you're being attacked by a swarm of insects. These insects, they're not going to cause you any serious damage, but it's just annoying. They're just buzzing around your head and preventing you from concentrating, or it's just people buzzing around your head, or it just could be you not knowing quite what to do with moon opposition Mercury, and you kind of know what you're supposed to be doing, but you don't want to do it, and there might be moments of indecision as Saturday moves into Sunday. But fundamentally, Gemini, you know what matters, and so there may be particular tasks that have to be done, and if you just go and do them, especially on Sunday, you will eventually feel quite good about yourself. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, it may actually be quite an interesting weekend, and it just may be that there are people you meet over the course of a weekend who are quite interesting and who aren't necessarily quite what you expect, and they may say things that you hadn't really anticipated, and you're wondering what it means, and there might be a surprise, and you might see someone in a new light, or maybe you even see a whole group of people in a new light, and you shouldn't make assumptions, especially as the moon is actually in the Via Combusta, and with the moon moving into Scorpio, that's really deep in the Via Combusta. Moon is actually not in great shape over the weekend, especially when it's in early Scorpio. So, other people may present you with things which you hadn't anticipated, and your first impulse may be to be annoyed, but if you look at it again, you might see this as an interesting opportunity. Cancer, it's a split weekend. Saturday, by and large, the moon is moving through Libra, and Sunday it's moving through Scorpio, though if you're in the Americas, then Saturday, by Saturday afternoon the moon is in Scorpio, so it kind of depends on where your time zone is, but we still get a sense of the moon moving from one sign to another. Now, you could say that the moon in Scorpio is problematic simply because it's a moon in Scorpio. I mean, the moon is fallen in Scorpio. But as I like to say to Cancerians, for you, moon in Scorpio isn't much of a problem. Moon in Scorpio represents things that essentially you are pretty familiar with. And so when the moon is in Scorpio, other people might not know what to do. They might not know how to respond, but you, Cancer, you're fine with it. You're a water sign. You can deal with emotions. You can deal with complicated emotions. And so moon in Scorpio isn't really much of a problem for you. Though the moon in Scorpio does make an opposition to Mercury. So there may be moments over the weekend, especially on Sunday, where there's something you want to say, but you can't quite say it because the environment isn't right. Or it could be that you're dealing with the wrong people. Not everyone is going to understand what you're talking about, and you try to say something, but you're hitting a brick wall. And it could work the other way as well. Someone says something to you and it doesn't mean anything. So don't try too hard to make a point, and don't try too hard to listen to other people's points, because I don't think that you're necessarily going to come to any useful conclusions. Though Mercury is moving into Taurus, so that's where the opposition lies. The moon in Scorpio opposition Mercury in Taurus. So there may be moments where this changeover from Mercury moving from Aries to Taurus creates complications. But in a broader sense, Mercury in Taurus isn't such a bad thing. It does represent new social opportunities between now and the end of May, because it's the end of May that Mercury moves into Gemini. See, I mean, Mercury moves very quickly through Taurus, I think. So, by the 26th of May, it's out. And so, with Mercury moving through Taurus, in general, it is a time when socially things are working quite well. There may be new people to talk to, but for the moment, in the short term, I don't think you'll regard Mercury in Taurus as being an especially good thing. It may just indicate people who you don't really understand, and they don't understand you. So probably you shouldn't be making much of an effort to get through to anyone, because it just might be a waste of time. So perhaps Cancer, with the moon moving into Scorpio, just be happy. You can be happy with moon in Scorpio. A lot of people find it difficult to be happy with moon in Scorpio, but not you, Cancer. And maybe you just shouldn't spoil it by worrying too much about what other people are doing and what other people are thinking. And of course, we've got full moon coming up. So full moon is on Monday, isn't that right? Full moon on Monday. Yep, that's right. Monday the 12th at around 6 o'clock in the evening London time, about then. So Monday's full moon, you're starting to feel it, because as soon as the moon moves into Scorpio, it's opposition the sun in Taurus. It's starting to move towards that opposition to sun in Taurus. And this full moon, might be about other people and about your social life and how you're spending your time. And you just may become aware of the limits of some of your social activities, and you may come to the conclusion that some of your friends, colleagues, they're not really doing you much good anymore. But at least you see the truth, and that's what full moons are all about. They are about the truth. And so when I talk about your day on Monday, I'll be going into more detail about this full moon, because full moons matter and they do need to be discussed. Leo, you feel that you're trying to make an impact, and you're making some progress. At least that's how it feels on Saturday, particularly early on Saturday. But the moon does eventually get into Scorpio, and the problem with the moon moving into Scorpio is that it starts to be in opposition to your sun in Taurus. Of course, it's the lead up to the full moon, with a full moon on Monday. And so moon in Scorpio may mean that there are things you certainly want, but do you actually have the inner motivation to really get things done, to be noticed, to really, get the attention you feel you deserve? And okay, you might blame other people for this, but you also have to consider yourself and your own position. With Moon in Scorpio, you are actually becoming sort of more more introverted than usual. It's passing. Moon doesn't stay that long in Scorpio, just for a couple of days, but you just might find Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you're not in the mood for doing the things that you would like to be doing. And that could be frustrating, but it might also be a good thing. Perhaps you're seeing things that you just hadn't seen before. You thought that something was going to be easy, and you thought you knew what you were going to do. Sun in Taurus is a time when Leos can be very ambitious. They just want to get going on things. They don't want things to be too complicated, but things are a little bit complicated. Not seriously complicated, but you just have to step back and look at the situation for what it is, and also be aware that not everyone is your friend, not everyone is supporting you. In fact, it's possible that there are forces out there that kind of want you not to do anything, are really actively trying to hold you back, and your job is to isolate those forces, to think about what those forces are, and then to act accordingly. So, Leo, it is potentially quite a serious weekend, and you can't expect things to just move in the way you would like, and you just have to be aware of complications and become aware of complications. So be open to the possibility of seeing something in a new way, and a way that at first you might not like, but still it does matter that you have those insights. Now, on a sort of a longer term level, this weekend sees Mercury moving into Taurus, and Mercury moving into Taurus overall, I think, is a good thing. And Mercury stays in Taurus for a couple of weeks, and over the next couple of weeks, Leo, you can really understand things, and you can really get to grips with what you want, what is holding you back, and what you need to do. And you could say that this weekend is the start of that process, because you start to see what is holding you back, and that's good. Knowledge is good. And then over the next couple of weeks, as Mercury moves through Taurus, it sort of zooms through Taurus, very fast movement. By May the 26th, it's out of Taurus and into Gemini, and so that is a time when you can really get yourself together. And if you're working, and particularly if you've got ambitions at work, then you'll see the picture, and you will be able to inform yourself of what needs to be done, and you can make a great success of it. But it requires some work, and the weekend could be the start of it all. Virgo, we always have to look at Mercury when we're doing the Virgo horoscope, because of course Mercury is your ruler, and so what we have is Mercury changing sign from Aries into Taurus. And Mercury in Aries probably hasn't felt great. It's felt that you were maybe not quite yourself. You couldn't be quite as clear as you wanted to be. I mean, you had things to say, but also you weren't always confident with what you were saying. You were worried about, whether you really knew what you were talking about. But Mercury moving into Taurus is a favorable change. Mercury is moving into an earth sign. Taurus is a sign that's very stable, that doesn't play games. And of course, if you're a Virgo, that's something you very much appreciate. And Mercury is making a trine to Virgo. I mean, that's the nature of Taurus. Taurus makes a trine to Virgo, so Mercury is making a trine to the sign of your sun or your ascendant or your moon at some stage. And so that allows you to be more positive and to be more adventurous. You can be adventurous because you're feeling more confident and you're feeling less worried. While Mercury was in Aries, you did have concerns and you weren't entirely sure how things were going to work out. But now that the moon is in Taurus, there are things you can be exploring, and you also have an opportunity to fine-tune some of your beliefs. Some of the things that are really important to you, that you really want to sort of make part of yourself. You can really start to fine-tune them, and that I think is something very fortunate. And it's important that you are as open-minded as possible, but in the end you can be too open-minded. At some stage you're going to have to make decisions. Say you've learnt enough, you've seen enough, now you know how it all works. And so Mercury in Taurus can help you in that sense. And also look at the way you come across and how you're arguing. So if arguing is important to you, I mean, you might be a lawyer or you might just enjoy a good argument. But if arguing is important to you, then Mercury in Taurus is going to make you more effective. Mercury in Aries is just slightly too impulsive at the wrong moment. With Mercury in Taurus, it's just going to be easier for you to argue things through in a logical way. You'll know what steps to take, and you won't get ahead of yourself, and you're going to be very good at building up your case. And part of that is because with Mercury in Taurus, you're going to be able to make the effort to get the facts you need. What you don't want to do is get involved in an argument where you don't know what you're talking about. That's a sure recipe for failure. But with Mercury in Taurus, you'll know how to bring things together, and you can start to really win your arguments over the next couple of weeks. And it just requires a bit of research, and just you don't get flustered. So that is something that you should be looking forward to. Libra, the moon is starting to move out of your sign, and over the course of a weekend, it moves from Libra into Scorpio, and that makes things perhaps a little bit complicated, especially because when the moon moves out of Libra and into Scorpio, it really starts to make a full moon. And so as the moon becomes full, then you start to see what things are really like, and you become aware of details that maybe you didn't really want to think about, and those details might have a financial aspect to them, and it could be just about money, which is a little bit complicated. Things aren't easy, and some people have not been particularly communicative when it comes to going on when it comes to what is going on with money. Money has just been something that has been sort of swept under the carpet. People haven't really wanted to talk about it, but money is the underlying issue. It's so often the case, isn't it? I mean, you think that money shouldn't be an issue, but it always is an issue. That's just the way it is. I don't think that's specific to any particular country or society. There's just always a financial complication, and right now with this build up to this full moon, I think it's very much there. And as a Libran, you sometimes like to avoid complicated issues. That's just a Libran thing. I mean, Librans can enjoy, or not enjoy, but they can feel most comfortable, when they're skimming the surface. You don't want to get in too deep, because that would upset the harmony, upset the balance. But sometimes it's necessary to go in a little deeper than you might like to, and be ready to understand things that to begin with you don't really want to understand. You might take the view that you can just sort it all out, just all by yourself. No, you don't have to sort it out by yourself. You can. It will sort itself out without you. Yeah, all by itself, and so you don't have to worry about it. But maybe you should be worried about it, and that could be one dimension of this weekend. And it may not just be about money. It might be about some of the hidden power struggles that are going on around you, and people are sort of vying for control, and you're vying for control in your own way, but perhaps you haven't fully recognized that. So just be aware that things are complicated. Things are more complicated than you want them to be, but just because something is complicated doesn't mean that you should necessarily be ignoring it. And additionally, many Librans are actually starting to become aware that something is not as wholesome as you thought it was. Something that everyone had perhaps taken for granted is not as nice as was previously thought, and it might actually be a little bit toxic. And so Libra, maybe you should think about, what is this? What is it that's starting to, maybe even starting to rot, or there's a bad smell. And I'm sorry to be so negative, but I think you have to be aware of this possibility, and it would be best to just ignore it. But I don't think that's a good idea. And the reason you don't want to say anything is because you don't want to make a fuss. You don't want to upset the balance. But if you actually have the courage to address a problem that everyone kind of knows about at an unconscious level but isn't talking about, then you'd be making things a lot better for yourself and indeed for everyone. Scorpio, you do have now the moon starting to move into your sign. And with the moon moving into your sign, it's good. I mean, not everyone likes the moon being in Scorpio, but obviously if you're a Scorpio, that's great. It makes you feel more comfortable, and it perhaps also makes you feel more in control and really, better able to express yourself and to look after yourself. But the moon, while it's moving through Scorpio, it does make moon makes a square to Pluto, and it also makes a makes a square to Mars. So remember that Mars Pluto opposition that we had quite recently. Well, the moon sort of refocuses it, and it comes back to life. And so there might have been an old issue which you thought you'd sorted out. Maybe it was something interpersonal. You and someone else were having an argument, or there was a power struggle or something. And the moon making a square to Mars and Pluto, it might all be coming out into the open again. And this time round with the moon in Scorpio, you have a chance to resolve it, because you could say that we've got a T-square on Sunday, with moon on the T, Mars opposition Pluto, moon on the T. And so through your own actions, through your own responses, and your ability to take the bull by the horns, then you can help resolve the matter. And in the process, you might have to go into areas that, strictly speaking, you don't want to go. The moon is actually making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith in Scorpio. And again, that's something that might sound problematic, but it just may be about you being able to deal with things that just other people can't cope with. And another point to make, Scorpio, is that we've got to build up to a full moon. So the full moon is on Monday, but already, by Sunday, the moon is in Scorpio, the sun is in Taurus, and that full moon is starting. And that full moon does make you aware that something is starting to develop, but maybe something needs to be confronted. And if you can confront it, then it would just make things easier. And I think it's just important to be honest. And I think, Scorpio, you really can be honest. And I think also, Scorpio, you can say things that other people can't say. They have to be spoken, and you say it, and people listen, and they know that you are right. I mean, you don't have any satisfaction with being right. It's not about winning and losing, but once people know you're right, they start to change the way they behave. And so by getting to the bottom of things, and by asking the questions that need to be asked, then in the end, that's going to make things easier and more harmonious. Sagittarius, at the moment, you probably feel that it's a weekend where you don't feel that you want a great deal to be happening. Why should you? You've got things you want to do in your own way, and you have some powerful thoughts, but perhaps you want to keep those thoughts to yourself. Now, if there's anything that you want to do this weekend of a social nature that is outward going, is a little bit extroverted, that uses the extroverted nature of Sagittarius, then try to do it as early as possible, because the moon starts being in it starts the week. You start the weekend of the moon in Libra, and the moon is making a trine to Jupiter. So to take advantage of that moon trine Jupiter, then start early. To an extent, it depends on your time zone. If you're in the Americas, Saturday morning should be where your focus is. Try and get everything done on Saturday morning. If you're in Australasia, then you don't have to worry so much. All of Saturday you can enjoy the moon being trine Jupiter. So yeah, it does depend on your time zone. But if you are in the Americas, there may be real urgency. And when the moon moves into Scorpio, Sagittarius, that is when you need to slow down, enjoy your own space, not feel the pressure. And additionally, if you've got something that you're good at that you want to really develop, you do it in your own way. You don't need anyone's assistance or anyone's affirmation. You don't need to be told that you're doing a good job. Not at all. You can work it out for yourself. So that should be your approach this weekend. And remember also you've got full moon coming up, and that full moon is on Monday, but it still creates a complication. And the full moon, you're just aware of how things are moving, that things are complicated, and you've got your own feelings to consider, and it should not be underestimated. And the power of your own feelings and your power of your own memories, that's kind of gravitating against external action. And the full moon is about just giving yourself clarity and not having to worry about other people and their annoying problems. And what they could do is they could just take a complication and just make it even more complicated. So it is important, Sagittarius, over the weekend and into Monday, that you do have as much control as possible. And it's important that you don't overexert yourself, especially in other people's company. On your own, when you're doing things you enjoy, when you're doing things you're good at, you can really push things. But as soon as other people get involved, it just becomes a bit muddy. Capricorn, it's a weekend which is not going to be easy for everyone. And a lot of people might be complaining, or they might feel that they can't really make the most of who they are, because there are just complications. I'm using this word complication a lot in my forecasts of the 12 signs. But as far as you're concerned, I don't think there's much of an issue here. I think actually it could actually be quite a good weekend throughout. And other people might be making hard work of it. They might be complaining, but you don't have to complain. You can listen to people's complaints, but you can respond. And as you've been over the last couple of weeks, you can be a bit of a rock. You can be a pillar. You can give people support and encouragement if they need it. But of course, you've got to look after your own interests. You don't want to be overwhelmed. But with the moon, the moon is in Libra. It starts the weekend in Libra, and then it moves into Scorpio. And both these signs, Libra and Scorpio, from a Capricorn view, are reasonably outward going. Libra in the Capricorn chart is about ambition. It's what you want to do, the impression you are trying to make. And so that's the moon. We've got the moon in Libra at the beginning of a weekend, and then it moves into Scorpio. And of course, Scorpio in a Capricorn chart is quite socially orientated. So those two signs, Libra and Scorpio, are both about the outside world, are about how you interact with certain other people. And so this weekend, there shouldn't be much of a problem there. And you benefit also by the fact that Mercury moves into Taurus. And so Mercury moving into Taurus, does actually allow you to get a sense of what you can do, and you have thoughts about how you can be unique and special, and that's indicated by other factors as well. So there is something about you that is very different, and you are aware of your differences. So you are socially aware, you understand that people matter, but at the same time, you also understand what makes you different, and it's what makes you different in a good way. And so Mercury in Taurus, it could say something about your particular sense of humor, or it could be about your observations. You observe things that other people miss, and it might be because you're prepared to stay with it. Something happens, everyone else just misses it, or they just make an observation and they don't see it through, but you notice something and you think, oh, that's important, I want to know more about it, I want to see how it's going to end. And that could be important. So if something piques your interest over the course of a weekend, don't just move on to the next thing. See where it's going, and be persistent. These are Capricorn traits. You do see it through to the end, and it could be worth your while. And in the process, don't get too distracted. It is true at the moment, Capricorn, that your social skills are pretty good, and with Moon in Scorpio, but you don't want to be overwhelmed by your social life. You don't want to be carried too quickly through the weekend, because there are certain things you want to stop, you want to watch them, you want to understand them, and you want to give yourself time to absorb new possibilities. And other people just might not be quite on the same wavelength. So yes, be in touch with your friends and others, but don't be unduly influenced by them. And also remember, there is a full moon coming up, and this full moon does emphasize the difference between what you want to do and what other people want to do. And you and other people may potentially have different priorities, and that might become clear by Monday, when that full moon becomes exact. But you can decide how much you want to give away, how much you want to compromise, how much you want to listen to anyone. There's no compulsion here. So I think it's a weekend where you'll have your finger on the pulse. I don't think you're going to be too bothered by the fact that the moon is in Scorpio, moon is in the Via Combusta. Yeah, sure, things can happen. Other people can not always be especially predictable. I mean, the moon, of course, in the Capricorn chart, it does say something about close relationships, because the moon rules Cancer, your opposite sign. So as the moon moves into Scorpio and makes an opposition to Mercury, there may be moments when you and someone who is important to you, there is a certain communication block. You feel you can't really say what's on your mind, or you don't understand what they're saying, but it's going to be very brief, when you have that moon opposition Mercury. But so don't take temporary communication problems, especially involving you and one other person. Don't take them too seriously, And just because you have a disagreement about one issue, it doesn't mean that it's serious. It doesn't mean that it has to get out of hand, and you just have to decide, what's important and how far you want to push things. But overall, you have choice, and so it shouldn't be a bad weekend, and certainly in a relative sense. And if you're looking at the 12 signs, I think that you, Capricorn, are going to have one of the better weekends of the 12. It may not be a 5-star weekend, but I think it will certainly be a 4-star weekend. Aquarius, you may feel that a decision has to be made, that you've been considering different possibilities for the last couple of days, and you're beginning to understand where it's all going, and you're starting to understand what works, what doesn't work. And now you're getting clarity, and I think it's much needed clarity. And we can conceptualize this as the moon moving into Scorpio. So moon moving into Scorpio may sound like a problem. Moon in Scorpio has a rather difficult reputation, moon being fallen in Scorpio. But as far as you're concerned, this moon in Scorpio might actually be a catalyst for a change that has been brewing for some time. And we might see this in terms of that Mars opposition Pluto. Remember, there's this Mars opposition Pluto that was around, is still around actually a bit, but for the last couple of weeks, we've had Mars in Leo opposition Pluto in Aquarius, and it's of course has been across the main axis of your chart, because you've got Pluto in Aquarius, Mars in Leo, and something was a little bit unresolved, and it could also have been about unresolved relationships. You weren't quite sure how you got on with another person. You weren't quite sure whether another person was good for you. And the moon, when it moves into Scorpio, okay, it could be on Saturday, but it moves into Scorpio, could be on Sunday. It kind of depends on your time zone. But the moon in Scorpio makes a square to Mars, it makes a square to Pluto. And that moon in Scorpio may be about a resolution. And so if you have felt that you didn't have as much power as you should have done, but somehow you were weaker than you really wanted to be, then the moon is it's a resolution. And perhaps the issue has been that you weren't in a position to make a decision. And of course, when one doesn't make a decision, one is in a position of weakness. I mean, other people know what they want, but you don't know what you don't know what you want. So that means that you can get pushed around. But moon in Scorpio square Mars square Pluto may be encouraging you to decide what you want. And the moment you decide what you want, the moment you can articulate what you want, then things change, things move, things really start happening, and your power becomes apparent. And it is the power of having Pluto in Aquarius, you having Pluto in your sign, being able to make independent decisions and being able to stand by those decisions. And that's something that I think you can do this weekend, and not just this weekend, into Monday. We do have a full moon on Monday. Moon in Scorpio, opposition Sun in Taurus, and that full moon might be about you really defining yourself, and you have your roots, you know what your background is, but you also know where you're going. And if you're clear about that, then what can get in your way. Additionally, this weekend we have Mercury moving into Taurus, and Mercury moving into Taurus, may say something about your ideas and how you make up your mind. This is a time for Aquarians to be making up their mind, and in order to make up your mind, you don't need to be exposing yourself to new information. You don't have to be looking at the world around you, trying to work out what you're being told. In fact, the answers are all within you, and you know the answer. The answers were all provided to you, I won't say at the beginning of time, I mean that would be an exaggeration, but those answers might just be connected with your natural intelligence. You can work things out on your own without needing external inputs. I mean, I think from a philosophical point of view, that means that you're taking a sort of a rational approach rather than an empirical approach. You don't have to gather information. You've got it in yourself. It's all there, and you can work it out. And that means that you don't necessarily have to listen too much to what other people are saying or what other people are suggesting. Listen too much, you probably don't have to listen to them at all. So Aquarius, I think it's a weekend for really defining who you are, defining what you want, and just sticking with it. And once you do that, you're going to be in a really, really strong position. Pisces. Pisces, we have the moon moving from Libra into Scorpio, and I would regard the moon moving into Scorpio as being something which was reasonably fortunate. I think moon in Libra you probably didn't enjoy that much. Libra and Pisces are two signs that don't particularly relate to each other very well, and so there could have been a certain sort of uneasiness over the last few days, and as you move into the weekend, and with moon in Libra, but then the moon moon in Libra does make a trine to Jupiter, and so that trine between moon in Libra and Jupiter perhaps allows you to ask questions of yourself, and perhaps you start to feel emotionally what works and what doesn't work, and perhaps a problem gets resolved, and then it gets resolved, and then the moon moves into Scorpio, and then moon moving into Scorpio is about you being able to break free from something, breaking free from something that was holding you back, that was puzzling you, and now you're more confident, and you can start to maybe ask questions, to do things perhaps that you've never done before, and be presented with something dynamic, represented maybe by the moon in Scorpio opposition Mercury in Taurus. And what happens when you discover something which contradicts what you always thought was the case. You thought something was true, and then you discover something else, and there's a complication there, a contradiction there. But it's not something that should worry you. It should actually be interesting. It's good to be challenged, and I think you can actually enjoy that. So if you come across something that didn't occur to you, or you thought the opposite was the case, you should be happy. It should be just a reminder that the world is wondrous, and it's infinite, and the possibilities are endless, and that should be your general approach. And additionally, Pisces, you start to see what you can do, and if you're prepared to work on something in a solid, persistent way, then Pisces, in the end, you're going to get results. And one point about the way you communicate, not just about this weekend, but talking about the next fortnight, because Mercury moves into Taurus, and Mercury stays in Taurus for a couple of weeks. And there are a couple of ways of looking at it. And one way of looking at Mercury in Taurus is saying about how you articulate your ideas. It could be about how you argue. And with Mercury in Taurus, I think that your ability to argue your case is going to be improved. And it's maybe because you can stick to the point. Sometimes Pisceans find it difficult to stick to the point, but if you're having an argument, you need to decide, what you're arguing about, and you mustn't get distracted, and you mustn't bring in irrelevant information, and you're going to be able to bring it all together. And so if you're trying to persuade someone that you're right, or that your point is correct, then I think that you'll be quite successful. And additionally, with Mercury moving into Taurus, that may say something about relationships. Mercury ruler of Virgo, your opposite sign. So when Mercury moves out of Aries into Taurus, that might be that someone close to you has a change. In the past, they might have been all over the place. They may have been rather impulsive, difficult to know what was going on. And then with Mercury moving into Taurus, you may find that someone calms down. Someone who you thought was a problem, was difficult to understand, and you were kind of a bit uneasy with them. Yeah, they calm down, and they are just much easier to deal with them. That may say something about the main relationship in your life, if there is a main relationship in your life, or the main relationships in your life. Partners and others are just are going to be more stable, more predictable, and quite possibly more trustworthy. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend of May the 10th and 11th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was a hexagram 33, which is retreat. And that's pretty clear. Now, retreat isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good idea to retreat. We've gone as far as we can go, but we realize we're not making much progress. So it's best to accept the situation and not take things too far. Additionally, with retreat, there's another way of looking at it, and it can be about us simply not being in a strong enough position to move to the next stage. We still need to gather our strength, and so that's something we can do over the weekend. And it is a somewhat difficult weekend, as I tried to describe when I was looking at the 12 signs. We've got the moon in Scorpio, we've got the build up to a full moon, we've got moon square Mars, moon square Pluto, we've got a T-square involving a moon on a T on it with Mars and Pluto. So do we really want to expose ourselves to danger and to aggravation when it's unnecessary, when we're still trying to understand what's going on? And full moons, complicated times. Let's perhaps wait until the full moon is over before really going out into the open, before we start taking risks. So that could be an approach, but the overall message here is retreat, and don't go out into the open. Don't take risks. Now, we do have two moving lines. The third from the bottom moves, and the top line moves. So the third from the bottom, it's a situation where it can sometimes be difficult to make a full retreat. There may be pressure to just keep going, or from a social point of view, we might want to get rid of people, but some people just hang on to us. So making a clean break in a social sense could be hard work, but it needn't be too much of a problem. And then the top line moves. Now, the top line in I Ching is often quite unfortunate, but in this case, the top line is talking about a retreat that just feels completely natural. We're actually happy about it. That feeling, when you've been really banging your head against a wall, you've been trying your hardest, and you have this moment where you realize that it's not working, and it just feels good to know that. And we know we're doing the right thing, and there's no criticism. If there is criticism, it's not justified criticism, and we just feel that a great weight off our shoulder, with a great weight off our shoulder as we finally abandoned something that was making our life miserable. And so that might be a feeling over the weekend. And with those two moving lines, we do move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is a hexagram number 45, which is gathering together. And so it might be that, we give up one thing and we get something else. So we retreat, we give up on something, at least for the moment, or perhaps we just feel that we're not strong enough. And, the moment we start to accept that something is not working, then maybe new opportunities start to arise. And those opportunities might be of a social nature, because gathering together is about getting the support of other people. And perhaps if you felt, you were working on something and it wasn't, just wasn't happening, perhaps you were alone, you weren't getting that support. And you can now look at things in a different way with other people's help. And so by the end of a weekend, you're going to feel that you're going to have, much greater sort of agency, and you're going to feel more supported. So in that way, it's perhaps a little bit different from the astrology. I think from an astrological view, I was of a view that the weekend would probably start quite easily, because the weekend starts with Moon trine Jupiter, Moon in Libra trine Jupiter in Gemini. Then it ends with Scorpio moving into Moon in Scorpio, moving into that full moon. But the I Ching is kind of saying the opposite. The I Ching is saying weekend may start as being a bit of a problem. It could be just difficult, but it should get better as it goes along. So this is an example, in some ways, of the I Ching contradicting the astrology, at least in terms of the timing and the order of things. But if you're concerned about the weekend, then it does look that, by the end of things, by the end of a weekend, you will have resolved something, and you'll be able to sort of, move on to the next stage, and you'll have a fair amount of outside support. And finally, I want to look at the Pope. And I'm not sure whether I have anything useful to say about the Pope, because I don't have a time of birth. And, what I say about the Pope now may be different when we get his time of birth. I would think that his time of birth will become available pretty soon. I looked at astro.com just before I made this video to see if a time had come up. I made that mistake with Mark Carney. I made a video assuming I didn't have a time of birth, and his time of birth was available, and I hadn't kept checking. But right now, I'm making this video on Friday morning, Pacific time. I can't find his time of birth, so that's the way it is. So let's start by looking at his chart. No, let's start by looking at the announcements. For the time that it was announced. There was an announcement chart, and then there was an election chart. So they are slightly two different charts. So here is the chart of the announcement. I was looking at my phone. There was once the white smoke had appeared, and people were gathering in St. Peter's Square. But I'd looked at, as the announcement was being made. I made it 10:13 a.m. Pacific time, which would be 7:13 p.m. Vatican time, and so here is a chart for the announcement. Now, what's interesting about this announcement chart is the ascendant. So the ascendant is 702 Scorpio. I made it. Could have been a bit. Maybe it was at 714, 713. It's going to be pretty close to that. But the descendant is at 702 Taurus, and so we had a new moon on. April the 27th, and that April April the 27th, yeah, that new moon was at 7:47 Taurus. So the descendant was exactly on a new moon. So that announcement chart was picking up the new moon, the beginning of a new lunar cycle. So that's certainly something interesting. And yeah, we have Scorpio rising, and this links with Mars and Pluto. Is it a particularly easy chart? I don't know. You've got Mars square. You've got Mars square the ascendant. You've almost got the ascendant on the Mars Pluto midpoint. It doesn't look quite as easy as maybe it should do. But this is a chart for the announcement, and maybe what really matters is a chart for the election. When the cardinals made a decision sometime earlier. And this is, I believe, the chart for the election. And the election chart is much more interesting. So I went to Wikipedia and it said it happened at 6:08. So we don't have Scorpio rising, we have Libra rising. And in this case, look at Chiron. Chiron is at 24:30 Aries. So Chiron was exactly on the descendant. And what does that mean? Now, if it's on a descendant, you could say that on a descendant it's something that is hidden, that maybe the cardinals weren't fully aware of. It could be an unconscious process. And Chiron is actually opposition true Black Moon Lilith. Mercury is opposition true Black Moon Lilith. So, there's a lot of excitement about the new Pope, people smiling and all this kind of thing. But, what were the underlying dynamics? And, with Mercury opposition true Black Moon Lilith, Chiron opposition true Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith rising, there seems to be something that those cardinals at an unconscious level might have been afraid of. And they weren't fully aware of it, and it just might have been a hidden process. That's one point. Now the other point is, when you're looking at popes, you look at the ninth house. If you've got a horary chart and you're asking a question about a pope, you locate him by the ruler of the ninth house. And so ninth house, the Placidus ninth house cusp is 24:8 Gemini. And so Jupiter is pretty much exactly on the ninth house. So as Jupiter came, it hit the ninth house. That's when they made that decision to have Leo XIV as a pope. And so, that's fitting. Jupiter on the ninth, but it's Jupiter in Gemini. It's Jupiter in its detriment. And also the ruler of the ninth is Mercury. So Mercury is opposition true Black Moon Lilith. It's also conjunct Chiron. And I just feel here that things aren't entirely right, and the moon is making a sextile to Mars, but it's making an opposition to Venus. That's the first aspect that's made, and so that moon opposition Venus. It's almost like they just wanted it to be easy. They wanted it to be an easy process. And I think that he was just, for whatever reason, he was an easy choice. They wanted to almost not confront something. I don't know quite why I'm saying that, but maybe I'm reading too much into this chart. And then there is the horoscope of the Pope himself. Now, I don't have a time of birth for the Pope, and here's his chart. Now, Neptune is about to move into Aries. And so I regard Neptune moving into Aries as being, Neptune's already in Aries. And so with Neptune moving into Aries, you expect leadership, and you expect clear direction. I mean, I've already described this when I've talked about Neptune in Aries. I mean, the last time Neptune was in Aries, there was a lot going on in the Vatican. You had Pius IX was Pope, and it was Pius IX. Of course, the Vatican was under a lot of pressure because it was Italy was in the process of reunification, and he was. I think he was Pope. Pius IX was Pope for 32 years, which is kind of not surprising for a Taurus. But it was Pius IX that brought in papal infallibility. He was, in a way, quite a strong, definite Pope, who was dealing with all the problems of Italian unification. I mean, my knowledge of Italian history is pretty minimal. And you could say that he was addressing the challenges of Neptune in Aries. So here is Pius IX's chart. Astro.com does have a time chart for him, but there are two different times. So I've just gone for noon anyway, and so you can see that Pius IX, born on May the 13th, 1792. In fact, it's going to be his birthday soon. So he has got 3 planets in Taurus, very clear about what he wants. Probably has moon in Aquarius, so he's certainly representing a vision of what he wants for the church, and that might be in accord with Neptune in Aries. And by the way, if you want another pope who has had a dramatic impact on the Catholic Church, would be Pope John Paul II. Again, 3 planets in Taurus, Venus, Mercury, Sun in Taurus. Again, very clear, quite an ideological pope. I mean, he, of course, was Polish, and he was very anti-communist, as might be expected from a Polish pope. I mean, who was appointed under communism, and that seemed to be his problem. But he was quite ideological about social matters, and he had, as far as I can see, very little patience for the liberation theology that was taking place in Central and South America. So he perhaps he thought that was just too close to communism. I mean, I think there is an issue here about it, but about Pope John Paul II and his choices about what was important. But still, he was a definite pope, and he had an impact. People loved him. And so we have the current pope, and I look at his chart, and I don't have a time of birth for him, but I don't really feel anything much with this pope. It seems to be a chart that isn't actually very interesting. I mean, I don't find it interesting. I mean, I don't find charts interesting if I don't have a time of birth for them. I very often don't find them interesting, but he's a Virgo. He's got 4 planets in Virgo. Well, he might have 4 planets. He has 3 planets in Virgo, and maybe the moon's in Virgo, could be in Leo, could be in Virgo. I'm sure we're going to know at some stage, or at least I hope we're going to know at some stage what his time of birth is. But clearly he's someone who very much understood his duties. He went to Peru. He did missionary work in Peru. He does what he has to do, and so he does a good job. As a bishop in Peru. But is that enough? Is there anything really dramatic and outstanding about this chart? Is he the kind of person that's going to really be the future of the Catholic Church? We remember Neptune's moving in. Neptune's in Aries. Neptune in Aries is looking for strong leadership, and even slightly controversial leadership. And I just wonder with this chart. And additionally, he does have Kala Sarpa Yoga. we have Kalasapa yoga at the moment. And I had a video about Kalasapa yoga. So Kalasapa yoga is when everything is on one side of the nodal axis. And so if you've got Kalasapa yoga, there is something very fated about it, so about someone's life. So there is a fated aspect to his life, that he was destined to do certain things. And of course we have Kalasapa yoga at the moment, at the time of the election of him as Pope. There was Kalasapa yoga. I mean, you could say that the moon was on the other side of the nodal axis, but the moon and the south node are in the same sign. They're both in Virgo. So I would have said that there was Kalasapa yoga at the time he was elected. So here we have a pope with Kalasapa yoga who was elected at the time of Kalasapa yoga. So, I might think that he's not the kind of person that is going to do anything dramatic. He's not going to really reflect the challenges of Neptune in Aries. But you could say that that is his fate. I mean, that the Catholic Church needed that kind of person. But I'm just not convinced by this chart. And you can see that he's someone who is. It's not just the Virgo planets. He's got Sun sextile Saturn, and he's got Jupiter in Leo. That's his only planet in a far sign, but that Jupiter is square Saturn. So he was born on the waning Jupiter-Saturn square. So you had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the beginning of the 1940s. So then you had the opposition around 1950, 51. So he was born on the waning Jupiter-Saturn square. So at the end of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. So that may say something about him. Yet he's coming, but yet he's becoming Pope on the waxing Jupiter-Saturn square. So so that's his Western chart, and that Venus. He's got Venus in Virgo. Venus conjunct the Sun. I mean, Virgo is a planet. Virgo is a sign of service. I mean, all things being equal, I wouldn't particularly like that Sun-Venus conjunction in Virgo, but maybe if you're Pope, if you're spiritually elevated, it's not such a bad thing. But I'm wondering about some of his choices in terms of personnel and people. And again, he has Jupiter in Leo, so he has got something in a far sign in far signs, but he's likely to work on the level of surface detail, especially if his moon is in Virgo rather than in Leo. We're soon going to find out whether his moon is in Leo or not. I mean, it would make sense for his moon to be in Leo, given the fact that he's called himself Leo XIV. So that might be something we might expect. But at the moment, we don't know. And as far as his Vedic chart is concerned, why am I looking at his Vedic chart? For a Vedic chart, you can't really tell much if you don't have a time of birth. Vedic astrology needs a time of birth even more than Western astrology. But we can use the Chandra Lagna chart. And so here is Leo XIV's Vedic chart. And I have put his moon on the ascendant. So I've made the moon his ascendant. Now, we don't know whether he's got his moon in Leo or Virgo from a Western perspective, but from a Vedic perspective, he's definitely got his moon in Leo, regardless of when he's born. So we're now looking at his Chandra Lagna chart. So Chandra is, of course, the Sanskrit for moon, and so it's a moon-based chart. And so taking things from the moon, you can perhaps see why he might be successful. He's got a fair amount of planets in angular signs from the moon. So, I mean, in houses, in angular houses. So he's got Moon, Mars, and the Sun in the first house from the moon, and he's got Rahu and Ketu he's got Ketu in the 10th house, Rahu in the 4th house, and so that may say something about why he has been sort of propelled to the heights. And of course, here is his Kalasarpa yoga. There, his Rahu and Ketu in the 10th, Rahu in the 4th. So yes, he's got Kalasarpa yoga, and so I think the dynamism of the man and how he was able to propel himself forward. I think we can see that in his chart. And Kalasarpa yoga, there is something about him that is very fated, and part of his fate, it would appear, is to be the Pope. Now, from a dasha perspective, what dasha is he in? Now, you could say, well, we don't know what dasha he's in because we don't have his time of birth. But in fact, we do know what dasha he's in, because this is his time of birth set for midday. And so if you take his midday time of birth, his Jupiter dasha would have started in 2019. If we set that chart for midnight, the beginning of the day, he's still in his Jupiter dasha. If we set the chart for just before midnight at the end of the day, he's still Jupiter in his Jupiter dasha. So he became Pope in his Jupiter dasha, and his Jupiter is pretty strong. He has got Jupiter in Cancer in his Vedic chart, and in his Navamsha, his Jupiter is in Pisces, also in its ruler. So his Jupiter is exalted in his main chart. But if we take the Navamsha, Jupiter is in its own sign in Pisces. So it is a strong Jupiter, and from the moon, Jupiter is in the 12th house. And the 12th house in Vedic astrology is seen as being unfortunate, but it's seen as being unfortunate. One reason why is because you are away from home, and it would seem that in Indian culture, or at least the kind of Indian culture from which Vedic astrology stemmed from, being away from home is considered to be unfortunate and unlucky. It's not something desirable. And clearly this is what happened with Leo XIV. He may have been born in Chicago, but he has been moving around. He spent a huge amount of time in Peru. He has a Peruvian citizen. Now he's moved to the Vatican, so he's always away from home. I mean, he may be an American Pope, or at least a United States Pope, but is he really? He is kind of away from home, and he's always sort of been traveling, and he has Jupiter in the 12th, Jupiter in Cancer, and so you could say that Jupiter in Cancer in the 12th house from a moon is actually working, as we might expect. And I think that Jupiter is a major strength for him, and certainly while that Jupiter dasha is in operation, we would have expected things to work well for him. And we don't know when it's going to end because we don't have his time of birth. And another thing about this about his chart is that Jupiter was around, in Western astrology, Jupiter was around 22 Gemini when he was elected, but of course that goes back into Taurus. So he had Jupiter in his transiting his 10th house, transiting his 10th house from the moon, therefore transiting the south node, and the south node in the 10th can be quite ambitious. Even if he's not ambitious, it sort of makes it does help. It makes it push. It can help them push him to the highest of positions. And Saturn has now just gone into Pisces. Okay, Saturn is making an opposition aspects to Venus and Mercury, but does that matter? I mean, that doesn't seem to have stopped him being Pope. So as you can see, I haven't got a great deal to say about him. Oh, by the way, he's got Saturn in Libra. He's got Saturn in Scorpio Western, but he's got Saturn in Libra in his Vedic chart, and of course the Saturn in Libra is exalted. In fact, you could say that he has got both Jupiter and Saturn, both the two chronocracies, the ruler of time. Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Libra, both of them are in their exaltations, and that also could help. So while I don't think there's any issues, as far as I can see, about him having a disastrous reign, I don't think it's going to be an impressive reign, and I don't think he was the right choice, because I just don't think that he's going to be able to deal with the challenges of Neptune moving into Aries. I think we need a more assertive, dynamic leadership, and I just think that from going back to the Western chart, there's just too much stuff in Virgo. That's kind of not necessarily what we needed. But I must say that we do not have a time of birth, and maybe when I have a time of birth, I will change my view. This is very much my initial impression. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.